All right, can I have everybody's attention? Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I want to just a couple quick announcements. One is I got a flyer from Texas Southern University. They're having several lectures on mathematical physics starting tomorrow through Thursday. So if anybody's interested in that, I can hand you around the flyer. Also, this is one of the last lectures of the semester. And next week, we're going to have our Shapley lecture, which is sponsored by, or at least partially sponsored by, the American Astronomical Society. And so that's going to be Edward Cobb coming in from the University of Chicago, and he's going to be talking about the mysteries of the dark universe, dark matter, etc. So that should be a really interesting talk. And today, we've got Dr. Honglu Wu, who, he's adjunct here at the university in physics, and he does biophysics research, as you can see from the slide. And he's also, right now, he's working with Dr. Rodi in biotechnology. So there's, he's going to be talking about biophysics and kind of some of the things that can kind of cross over between physics and biology. And of course, this is all work being done at the Johnson Space Center. So with that, I'll turn over to Dr. Wu.
Thank you, Dr. Garrison, and I'd like to thank for the invitation. And so what I am doing at Johnson is to study the effect of space radiation exposure in the astronaut in the context of radiation protection. And because as we all know that the astronaut a group of people who are exposed to perhaps the highest doses of occupational radiation. And so what we do in NASA is to make sure that their radiation risk is not so high that they may develop cancer in the later part of their life if they shift to Mars or to the moon. So, of course, I mean, as far as the radiation goes, there are many different ways you can do it, and one way you can do it is to use a biomedical means, to develop some magic drugs, and actually those magic drugs are typically some antioxidants that will scavenge and free radicals generated from radiation exposure. And of course, I mean, we all know about shielding, and you can use shielding to block the radiation. But what I'm going to talk about today is mainly just to touch upon some issues that we're facing. So perhaps I'm going to show that perhaps we don't know a lot of things than we do, okay, as far as the effectiveness of the shielding in the protection of astronauts in space radiation exposure. So I'm going to give a some very general introduction to space radiation environment and approximately, I think you probably are very familiar with this area because I think space physics is one of the major focus here at the Clear Lake. So as far as space radiation is concerned, so it's different from X-rays and gamma rays that we deal with in space radiation is that so those are the high energy charged particles. So you have atom here, you have a nucleus surrounded by the electrons. When when you strip away all the electrons, then you have a particle here carrying a positive charge. And when this particles travel at extremely high speed, we talk about MeV or GeV energy range, and that's probably have a speed of 0.999 from speed of light. And then that's what you have in space. So I'm going to go into somewhat detailed, what the spectrons and all those are. Because after all, this is a physics lecture. Okay, and then what I forgot to say here is that the in addition to those charged particles which are present in space, you got secondary neutrons that we need to concern with for astronaut cells. And secondary neutrons are generated as those charged particles penetrating through the spacecraft, or they can be generated as those particles hitting the soil of Mars, for instance. So this kind of will give you an idea what the radiation sources are as far as the astronaut health is concerned. And one of those will be the proton trapped in the geomagnetic field. And you can see that it's asymmetric to the rotation axis of the Earth because the Earth's magnetic field doesn't line up with the rotation axis. And if you were to travel at the orbit of the space station or a space shuttle, and only when the spacecraft passing through this point that the astronauts will be exposed to the trapped protons. And this particular point is what we call the South Atlantic anomaly. And then when you travel outside of the Earth, the Moon, or Mars, then you can be exposed to galactic cosmic radiation. And those are the cosmic rays consist of things of protons or very heavy ions as well. And the third radiation source is the mostly protons released when the large solar particle event. So basically, those are the three radiation sources we are concerned about. And the trapped protons as well as the GCRs, they are present all the time. So the astronauts are exposed to those radiations and chronically. Okay. Whereas for solar particle event, it happens occasionally, but then once it happens, and the astronaut can be exposed to a pretty large dose over a short period of time. In that case, the astronaut may experience some health consequences like acute radiation syndrome, vomiting, and etc. And this is just a map. I don't know any radiation people have come here to talk about it? Probably.
Unfortunately, not yet.
Okay, all right. Okay, so this is the radiation field map on a space station, and it's a Mir space station. And so that you see the inclination from minus 57 to 57, and we don't have anything below or above that. And the background is the Earth. And this is South America, and this is the South Atlantic anomaly that I mentioned about. Okay. And these are the polar regions. And when you close to the polar regions, you get GCRs and solar protons that can penetrate along the geomagnetic field line to reach the lower Earth orbit. Okay. Right, and just to give you a couple of very basic concepts of radiation physics and radiation biology. And this is a dose, okay, which is a typical concept, and which is the EDM, or the energy deposited in the unit volume. And the unit of that is joule per kilogram or gray. I'd like to introduce another quantity called LET, or linear energy transfer, which is similar to this, but then it's the energy deposited per unit traversal of the particles. So it's called linear energy transfer. And in the charged particle radiation biology, people like to use this concept because for low LET and you can have this type of radiation, gamma rays, X-rays, some protons or light ions. And high LET would be heavy ions, for instance, silicon, argon, iron ions, etc. And then there's another quantity, what we call the dose equivalent, which takes into account of the biological consequences of the dose. Okay, so here you have a quality factor, and the quality factor here, Q, is a function of the LET. Okay, and here you have a low LET, and then you have a high LET. So what this figure says is that as far as the radiation risk, in this particular case, is a cancer risk, is concerned, for instance, if you were to expose to 1 grade of gamma rays and compare to 1 grade of, for instance, iron ion, then the chance that an individual will have cancer develop, okay, can be 30 times higher if the exposure is the radiation source is iron instead of a gamma ray. So this particular dose equivalent is a dose but taking into account of the biological effect. And the unit here is a sievert. So if you were to read or watch the news about this Japanese nuclear power plant, and then you probably come across this unit quite a bit. And this unit actually is pretty big, and then once you get exposed to 1 sievert, that's a pretty high dose. So typically you may hear the unit like a microsievert or millisievert instead. Okay, so how much dose does an astronaut exposed to during a space flight? Of course, I mean, depending on the mission of depending on the orbit of the mission. For instance, human mind, those are only short flights and lasting between a few hours to a few days, and the astronauts on the average were exposed to very low doses. Okay, the unit here is a centisievert. And now if they stay longer, then they get exposed to higher doses. And I'd like to draw attention to this couple of slides. One is the STS-94, and the other is 95. I think the difference here is that the altitude here is 310 nautical miles, and in comparison to 160, has the same inclination and duration. This is actually shorter than that, but then this the dose is about 10 times of that. So you can see that the dose is highly sensitive to the altitude of the mission, and I believe this is the mission for either the Hubble launch of the Hubble telescope or the repair of the Hubble telescope, and that's the highest altitude that the shuttle has ever gone. And a space station now, ISS has a similar orbit, okay, and to stay up there for 3 to 5 months, you can get about 10 centisieverts or so. And those are still pretty big doses. So just to give an idea, if you were to compare to the dose we receive in our daily life, and we take a chest X-ray, you get about 0.02 centisieverts, and you don't want to do barium NMR, you try to avoid CT, and it's great to live in Houston, but then not so good to live in Denver. And if you were to fly from LA to New York, you probably would get the dose of all.
Got a question.
Yes.
What was the number for going to the moon?
For going to the moon, that would be, I have the Apollo number here. And the Apollo mission, it's about a couple weeks of mission. So Apollo is about 150. So it said that's about if you were to go for 2 weeks. But then if you were to go to Mars for like a 3 years mission to Mars, then you can have your exposure that exceeds the dose limit that we have set for radiation workers. Okay. And my colleague sent me this slide last week, and it's from a website, and it shows some of the radiation doses that we receive in our daily life. Kind of interesting because and it does have a few numbers for the Japanese nuclear power plant. If you were to stay in those areas, how much those workers will get exposed to. A couple other interesting numbers here. I mean, you eat banana, you get some radiation exposure to, and it's because of the potassium. And we probably get quite a lot of potassium yearly from the food we eat, and salt or other food. And here it says something about perhaps you get more exposure if you live near a coal power plant and near a nuclear power plant. Okay, of course, and if there's no accident to happen. So if you are interested, and then that would be a kind of an interesting chart. So some more physics about the radiation, and this is a spectrum of a trapped proton, and again, and the proton trapped in the magnetic field, and first measured by James Van Allen, and so this cell is named after him. And in fact, I just think the story was that the first satellite that the U.S. launched, we had radiation detected and from the Explorer, and they just measured a very high level of radiation, higher than predicted, and then later was identified as radiation in the Van Allen belt. So if you were to look at the spectrum, what you see is that those are mostly protons, and the energy can reach several hundred MeV, but still not as high as some other sources, such as in this case the GCR, or galactic cosmic radiation. And in this case, you can have different atomic numbers, and from protons or helium to a very high element. And then the spectrum here can go somewhat higher, and so this is 100 MeV per nucleon. So this is 1,000 MeV or 1 GeV per nucleon. So the energy of the particles are typically higher, and then you also have heavy ions, what we call the high LET radiation. And this just shows that different particle types from hydrogen, helium, lithium, to some very heavy ones. And this is the total abundance, and it's an open bar, and the solid bar shows the dose contributed from, for instance, in this case, the iron in this case. Just give you an example that the cosmic ray of space radiation consists of particles of all different masses, and as well as different energies. So the first one is the photons released from the solar particle event. So this is not quite strange to us, because when they penetrate to the atmosphere through the polar region, and then it created the aurora. And when the solar particle event occurs, it depends on the solar cycle, and during solar maximum activities, there will be more chance for that to occur as compared to solar minimum activities. But when it happens, I think now there's still lack of a very reliable model to forecast. And this shows some the course of the event, and this particular event happened in July of 2000. And once it occurred on this day, July 14th, and then it will last for about a day or so, and then this shows the flux, and then it tapers off. And this is another event happened in August 1972, and this actually shows the dose calculated over a course of many hours, and actually many days. And this is 40, so this is 1, 2, 3, and 4 days, and etc. And you can see that there's the temporal behavior of the dose. So over the course of a solar particle event, both the fluence and the energy spectrum changes dynamically. And if you were to look at the accumulated energy spectrum, and here it shows several different events, and I think the October 89 and August 72 events are considered two big events. And you can see that most of the big events will have an energy below 100 or so MeV. So typically, solar particle events would generate protons with somewhat lower energy than the trapped protons and GCRs. Okay, just showing that what different particles would generate the trapped the material that has hydrogen compared to iron. So what you can see is that the ions will generate much dense track than the track of hydrogen. And this each thing is a cell nucleus, and this shows that if the cell is exposed to gamma rays, and it generates what we call double strand break. So it's the DNA that gets broken, and so you see that the double strand breaks are distributed somewhat uniformly inside a cell nucleus, whereas the high LET is distributed along the track of the particles. Okay, again, some more fundamental concept for those. Those is the energy deposited in the unit of mass. And for low LET, for instance, the protons, you probably need many protons to deliver a dose of 1 gray. For them, for high LET, for instance, iron, perhaps you only need 1 track to develop to deposit that much of those in the material. Okay. All right. So much for the basis of radiation physics or space radiation physics. Now, the question that we try to ask is that how effective is the shielding to stop space radiation from exposing the astronauts? And so how effective is any of the shielding materials to stop those high energy charged particles? And to answer that question, okay, so perhaps we should just review how the material can stop charged particles. It can do it in 2 ways. One is that it can stop by the electrons along this nucleus. Okay, in this case, it's a photon, but for charged particles, it's the same thing. So you have a particle coming in, will be scattered by the electrons. So the particle will be stopped. And it can be through the nuclear interaction too. And here it shows an example of a high energy proton. Actually, this energy is not very high in comparison to, for instance, 100 MeV. But in this case, proton can be absorbed by the lithium nucleus and then producing 2 other fragments. If the incident particle in this case is not proton, for instance, it's heavy ion, like iron, and this incident particles can be broken into some smaller fragments too. And so typically the way that the particles get stopped would be through these 2 means. So then when a particle or radiation, okay, can be a heavy ion, charged particles, or photons penetrate through material, what does those distribution look like? Well, it depends on the type of radiation. Here it shows the low energy X-ray. So basically, it just decreases, okay, as the photon penetrates through a material. And if you have a high energy photon, like generated from a cobalt-60 gamma rays, and initially there's a small buildup, but then eventually it will decrease as it penetrates through the material. However, when you have a carbon ion, in this case, they carry a charge of 6 electrons, and once the particle penetrates through the material, and it will eventually get slowed down and stop right here. And once it stops, and that's when it delivers the most of the dose. So for charged particles, the dose depth distribution is somewhat unique. And this uniqueness of the dose depth distribution has been used for cancer therapy. For instance, if this is your body thickness, okay, somebody has a tumor, okay, about 10 centimeters inside of the body, and if you to shoot a carbon ion, 200 MeV, for instance, and if this carbon ion just happens to stop right there at the location of the tumor, then the tumor will receive a lot more dose than the normal tissue surrounding the tumor. So this is the advantage that has been used actually for cancer therapy.
The doctor told me that if we use the proton, it's so precise that we might miss the tumor because it's so narrow the range.
Okay, all right. Gosh, you must have read my mind. Okay, yes, exactly. That's the whole point. Okay, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. Is that if you have a particle with a single energy, 200 MeV proton, for instance, and it's difficult for the an accelerator to change the energy easily. So if you do that, then all the particles will only stop right at this narrow range. But your tumor can be this big. Right. So how do you generate a dose distribution that will cover the size of the tumor? Then you put some redshifter in the front. So basically, what you do is that you put a set of redshift in the front, so you will generate. So this is the primary particle, and then you put something in the front about this thick that will shift your Bragg curve to here, and then you put another thicker that will shift your Bragg curve like this. So eventually, then you would add them all together. You will generate a dose depth distribution that will have a plateau, and then you want to design in such a way that this just right covers the size of your tumor. Okay. So this is the idea, and here is basic. Okay. Here actually this shows clearly what the idea is. So you have a wrench shifter here, and then your incoming particles have only one energy. So after this, then you will have a different energies now. Okay, and then they define this actually per tumor, and so that this dose will be maximized around the tumor, and so that if you look at here, so the proton, for instance, shooting this way, and of course, and then the patient, normal tissue will still receive some dose, but then the tumor will still receive most of the dose. But in comparison to X-ray, for instance, then normal tissue in here will receive some dose as well as the normal tissue in this area, and this shows the same thing. Okay, it's a different view. So this is not space, but then it's interesting that in a way in this community of charged particle radiobiology, we share the similar interest with the medical community in the regard that we have conferences together, and we go there to use the accelerator because it's hard for space communities to build an accelerator just for our own. But then these days there are many proton therapy facilities now in the U.S. and Jefferson has one already running, and there's one at Mass General Hospital and Loma Linda University Medical Center in California, and a few other ones, like one in Florida and one in Indiana. So I think this proton therapy certainly is getting more and more popular, and exactly because we want to make use of that property of the Bragg curve. So how would we stop charged particles then? Well, okay, let me just show a couple of Bragg curves here. Perhaps I'll just go over this two in this case. So here we have iron 56, having a charge of 26 electrons, and that's a pretty shallow penetration depth, about only half of a centimeter. And if you look at the Bragg curve, it goes up and comes down, and pretty much stay at zero. So what you do is that it's not so hard to stop this particle. You just have some material which is thicker than half of a centimeter, then this particle will get stopped. So if you have an astronaut behind this 1 centimeter, say, thickness shielding material, and then the astronaut will be protected. However, now in space, I mean, this only accounts for some of the particles in the energy spectrum. So if you have a higher energy, iron 56 again, now the penetration depth, okay, is about 11 centimeters. And you see a couple of different things here now, okay. One is that if you have a shielding thickness, say 12 centimeters, you stop the primary particle. But now, since this particle now has an incident energy of 550 MeV, and in a way, this is actually about 100, this is a 600. So in the accelerator facility, once you do your experiment, and this primary beam has to pass through some filters, and by the time it reaches the sample, usually it will get reduced to this much number. But so here is that if you have a shielding material of about 12 centimeters thick, and it will stop the primary particle. But now this has a much higher incident energy. It will generate more secondary particles. And those secondary particles can have longer range, especially they can contain neutrons. And once they contain neutrons, then you know that the neutrons typically don't get stopped easily. So they will have a longer range, so in this case, it will have a longer tail in this case. And one of the areas I was going to touch upon in the beginning was that when I want to talk about the secondary neutron effect, and that is, if you stop the primary particle, it will generate secondary neutrons. And we really don't know much about whether the secondary neutrons are more effective in inducing cancer than the primary particles so much. So those are all the unknowns. We are still trying to find out. But for now, what I'm going to do is not to emphasize that aspect yet, but instead I want to emphasize on the Bragg curve. Okay. So again, I mean, space radiation is a spectrum. Okay, particles that coming with all different energies. So you have some lower energy particles which give you a Bragg curve looks like this. Higher energy one can give a Bragg curve like this. So if you were to sum them all together, it probably will give you those set distribution like this. So in that case, when you put a shielding material about this big, you do stop quite a lot of low energy particles. So in this case, yes, the shielding can stop space radiation exposure, especially, I mean, it can stop protons, which have somewhat less energy than, the protons from the solar particle event, which have somewhat less energy compared to the protons and other particles in the GCR. Okay, so what happens with the heavy ions then? Okay, with the GCR. Well, if you have a GCR here, and the spectrum would consist of that of the helium of protons, hydrogen of protons, helium, carbon, iron in this case. So if you consider all the particles and the spectrum for all individual particles, and you calculate the dose, okay, in this case it's the dose equivalent, okay, that takes into account the biological effect. So dose equivalent as a function of a penetration depth, and you see a few things that a colleague of mine, John Wilson, I think he's retired at Langley, and they have found that, well, of course, and the hydrogen-rich material will be most effective. So you will have decrease of the dose equivalent as a function of the penetration depth. And that actually is pretty bad because if you see here, there's actually an initial buildup, and then it decreases as the thickness increases. Okay, and water here is somewhere in between. Okay, but in this case, this curve, then you will assume that okay, now we use, for instance, some water in this case, and you probably can assume this is the case, and then you can plan your design with spacecraft so that you will design such a thickness that will give you the best benefit to a cost ratio. However, the question I want to raise here is that whether the quality factor or the Bragg curve here, okay, will be enough for you to generate this type of curve that you see here. Okay, the reason I question this is that well, if cancer is what we are concerned about, okay, and if you were to look at the damage at the cellular level, and you see that when you have a cell with a traverse by some charged particles, most likely those cells will simply die. Okay, they will be killed by those particles. But then it will be those cells that are damaged, not severely, but then the damage will occur perhaps in some of the genes, okay, oncogenes, for instance. So those cells perhaps will develop a cancer in the later part of the astronaut's life. So those are the cells that we are concerned about. So this particular curve that gives you the dose in material perhaps will be more relevant to the killing of the cells, but however perhaps will be somewhat less relevant to the those cells that are not hit directly by the charged particles. Okay. So in order to then to be able to calculate a risk as a function of the penetration depth for GCR as well as for trapped protons or protons released from the solar particle, again, we really need some curve, what I call a biological curve, that you have a biological consequences as your y-axis. In this case, can be cancer and as a function of a penetration depth. Well, however, that kind of experiment is perhaps very difficult to do, and so what we did, this was what we did a few years back, is to look at another biological endpoint, which we called it a micronuclei. And what happened is that when a cell is exposed to radiation and the DNA is damaged, and this damage can be seen once the cells reach this stage, or when the cell is about to divide. Okay, and once they divide, then they will go back to the G1 phase of the cell cycle. So here it shows the cell cycle from G1 to S, G2, and then reach mitosis, and then goes back to G1 again. So when you look at under the microscope, and if you see two cell nuclei, in this case that's accompanied by a small nucleus, and we call it a micronucleus. And in this case, the cell does not have a micronucleus, but has two mother nuclei. So this we call a micronucleus, and we can use the incidence of this type of a damage as a marker for the DNA damage of the cells after exposure to radiation. So when we try to do the experiment, or we try to obtain what I call a biological Bragg curve for micronuclei induction, and this is the setup we do. Okay, so for instance, we have a flask here. Okay, and then the cells are cultured at the bottom of this tissue flask. Okay, and then the beams will come this way, and if you were to view from the top, and this flask at the bottom is like a slide, and then it's full of cells. So in this case, you have incident particles coming in, and at different location on the slide, then the penetration depth is different. For instance, we can put some wrench shift in the front so that the Bragg, the particle will stop right here in the middle of the slide. So in this case, your Bragg peak, okay, where the particle stops can be somewhere at this location. So you can look at the micronuclei formation in those cells by dividing those cells in the slide by different strips. Okay, for instance, and with a width of about 1 millimeter wide. Okay, in this case, so we can cover a Bragg curve, but the damage in the Bragg curve region in one slide. So that's the idea of this experiment. Okay, so here I show some of the results that we have for a few different charged particles. And this is a 300 MeV per nucleon silicon ion. This is a measured Bragg curve. So this is data that's provided by the physicists at the accelerator facilities. And here it shows that the particle, the primary particle, will stop right at about 6 centimeters more. So this is the depth is grams per centimeter square in water. So you can, for water, the density is 1, and so 6 grams per centimeter square will be equivalent to about 6 centimeters. And here is a micronuclei formation. So what you can see immediately is that, well, okay, at the incident point, okay, you have some frequency, and then once it reaches the Bragg peak region, and you don't see any of the peak at all. Okay, you don't see any of the peak at all, and after the peak, it's dropped down to the background level. So what is said here is that if you were to look at some of the biological endpoints, such as the micronuclei formation or some DNA damage, and it doesn't resemble the Bragg curve distribution at all. And this is another endpoint that we measure. We call it the ratio of mono to binucleate cells. And this actually gives you, I didn't get into that in detail, but then basically this is a marker for cell death. Okay, so what it says is that if you look at the depth of the cell, okay, it does show a peak here clearly, and then the peak coincides with the peak of the Bragg curve. So depending on the type of endpoint that you're looking at, you look at the cell death. Yes, I mean you do see a peak, but then if you look at the micronuclei frequency, no, there's no peak here for 300 MeV per nucleon incident silicon ion. So what can we say this about cancer? Well, what we say about cancer is that the cancer probably is more related to this endpoint than this endpoint. Again, to repeat what I said earlier, and for cancer, a dead cell is a good cell. Okay, because a dead cell won't do anything, but it's the cells that get damaged but still be able to survive, and those are the ones that are most dangerous. So this is a 300 MeV silicon, and this is a 300 MeV per nucleon ion. Again, you have a penetration depth about 4 centimeters, and this is a measure of dose distribution and micronuclei frequencies. There's no peak here, and you see a small peak for the cell death. Okay, for as you increase the energy, then you will see the distribution are somewhat different. Okay, here is again for 1 GeV per nuclear ion. Okay, the particles will the dose will decrease, and once they reach the bracket, it will increase and drop down. And here is the micronuclear frequency, and you don't see much of peak here. And this is the cell death. And this is for 1 GeV per nuclear silicon ion. The range is so large that the physicists were unable to measure the fracture distribution. So when we look at the micronuclear frequency, again, we don't see a peak, and here we do see for cell survival. Okay. And some of those are the same as we saw earlier, but it's the Tacks 2 endpoint here. This is a micronuclear formation, and this is the fracture distribution. Okay, for 300 MeV silicon, we saw earlier 300 MeV iron, and we saw earlier this also 1 GeV per nuclear iron. And this is one we didn't see earlier. And this is for 250, actually 238, so it's a 250 incident protons. And in this case, when we look at the micronuclear frequency, and we see a peak which matches the location of the Bragg. So it's very interesting by looking at this is that so when we look at the biological Bragg curve, which can be very different from the physical fracture, but different perhaps for high LET or heavy ion, but the difference can be very small for low LET protons. And we try to look at the effectiveness of shielding for neutrons as well. And I said that in the beginning that the neutron can only be found inside of the big crack or on the surface of Mars or the Moon. Okay, and here it shows the neutron spectrum measured inside of the ISS. This is also similar to the spectrum that has been measured at the upper atmosphere from I think 30 or 50,000 feet altitude, and I forgot which one. So this is the neutron spectrum you can find in space. And here it shows that normally after some shielding material, and in this case it's 10 centimeters of water, the spectrum will change. So typically the low energy neutron will get dark, but then the high energy neutron typically will still passing through. So this is neutron spectrum that we are concerned about. And for this particular neutron to be generated, we went to Los Alamos National Lab. So they have a neutron facility, and they generate those neutrons by bombarding the tungsten target with 800 MeV protons. And at the angle of, I believe, 30 degrees, and they call the beamline L30, and the spectrum of the neutron will be given like this. So the biology experiment we did was this. We have cells cultured in the flask, tissue culture, and they are all, because they are contact cells, so those cells just attach to the bottom of those flasks. Okay, so it's either here for this flask and this, and they are all here. So we just stack them up and then just shoot the neutron beam through, and then we look at the again the micronuclei formation in the cells in each of the flasks. Okay. So and so what we did was that when we do that and we look at the micronuclei frequency. Okay, for instance, now here is the cells here, and this point will be the cells here, and these are from two different incident energies. So we found that well, the micronuclei frequencies will drop down and then kind of plateau out. and here again drop down and kind of a plateau out. Okay. And if we were to compare the calculated dose equivalent as a function of penetration depth, and what we saw is that the shapes are different in two regards. One is that this bond we saw here for both energies, we probably didn't see at obvious, okay, for in the calculation. And that's one. And two is that if we look at the, I hope we have more points here for even thicker depth, because we really, for this, it probably will come down continuously, and we don't know whether this would come down slower than the calculation will have predicted. Okay, this won't decrease much, and it could be because those trapped neutrons would still be able to penetrate through and generating some micronuclei in the cells. So to conclude the auto studies, and we found that the effectiveness of shielding depends on the distribution of the biological curve, and not just depending on the physical of Bragg curve. The biological Bragg curve for particles cannot be predicted by the dose and dose equivalent distribution. And for the micronuclei induction and for protons, low LET protons, the shape are pretty similar. But for heavy ion or high LET particles, the biological Bragg curve for micronuclei induction is very different from the physical Bragg curve. So back to the question that we asked in the beginning. Okay, if we want to develop have a good enough knowledge about the effectiveness of the shielding for space radiation protection, what we really need to know is the Bragg curve distribution for endpoints such as cancer. Okay, and however, it's probably impossible to do the kind of a tensor study for all different particles and all different energies. And so eventually, okay, we have to learn those knowledges from the mechanistic understanding of tensor width for different particles and different particle types and different energies. But at least from the studies that we have done, we have shown that for biological endpoints, okay, the Bragg curve, the physical Bragg curve distribution certainly is not sufficient to give us enough information to understand how much, to understand the effectiveness of shielding for space radiation exposure. So I'd like to acknowledge a few people who did the work, and for the Los Alamos experiment, and I collaborated with some of the folks at the Prairie View and University. And I think that's the last one I have. Thank you. Okay, questions?
So do we have to concern about that airport breathing and my cell phone use dental X-ray to the face? And if you were going to try to take medicine or do lots of blueberries, do you do it before, during, or after?
Okay, blueberry and okay, let me do the blueberry. Blueberry, strawberry, eat them as much as you can. They will give oxidative and the parties, right? So usually, I think we have some investigators, not myself, but we have investigators looking at the strawberry, blueberry as a countermeasure. for radiation exposure. I think certainly those are, I think are good. And the other things you can take, like a vitamin, a colleague of mine has made some statements in regard to this Japanese nuclear power plant. They say that the vitamin, I think we know that vitamin A in particular good for mitigating radiation damages. Okay, and then airport. I think airport, that is more of an electromagnetic wave rather than ionizing radiation, so that's probably not much concern. And cell phone, again, electromagnetic wave. Cell phone, but we never looked at it, but then that's my not my area in particular, but then in general, that's a radiation research interest, especially the companies like Motorola, they have been given money to some investigators to look at the effect of waves released from the cell phone. And from what I read in the journal and the presentations that appeared, so the conclusion is that typically, even with the animals, okay, which are prone to develop cancer, I mean, you see very high intensity of those waves at the same frequency. And normally, I mean, you can't really find much of cancer incidents. You can find changes in the kidney expression and all those. But I think cell phones have been around for so many years now, and I think it's just the effect. It should show the problem. Statistics, with some statistics. I think certainly I don't think that should be a concern. Dental X-ray certainly. I think when I took my kids to the dentist, and when they were young, they did the dental X-rays, I was concerned. So I think perhaps for kids, it's good to avoid.
Talk about taking antioxidants, but if you take a lot of antioxidants, could you be helping those DNA damaged cells that might otherwise die to live and produce cancer? Now that's a question I don't know the answer. Yeah, I think you take a lot of antioxidants. I think it's so your point is that well, we want some cells to die too, but then if you just keep the cells young, okay, forever, then they might be more likely to develop cancer. And I think we probably have to do some calculation, kind of to compare the damage versus the survival. So before I do that, I probably don't have the straight answer for you. But I think it's the damage part, okay, that you can prevent by taking antioxidants. So I think if you were to reduce the damage, I think it's usually a good thing. For instance, in animal studies, and we have looked at some nanoparticles as antioxidants. So this is possible. Possible attached to some other molecules to make the particle soluble. And people have done the study with animals and mice. And give them a small dose of those, and those animals can live longer than the people. So I think it should be good if you take antioxidants.
So does it mean that if somebody is having radiation treatment, should not eat too much blueberry?
No, that's I see. Well, then this goes to a different question at the normal cells versus the tumor cells. And so in radiation therapy, for instance, this particular nanoparticle I was talking about, okay, when people want to study this for cancer patients,
So they started with cancer patients, and so they want to understand that when you give the patient this particular compound or drug, and it will help the normal cells, but not the tumor cells. Okay. So that's exactly your question. So for this particular drug, I think they found that in the cell body, you can compare their from cell without the disease, give a little bit of those particles exposed to radiation, look at the survival, and they did find that the effectiveness for cancer cells, for tumor cells, will be less as compared to the normal cells. So that will have the benefit. But then go back to your cancer patients, and I don't. Well, in a way, I mean, when you treat the patient, then basically, I don't know how much the blueberry will help the cancer cells to survive from radiation damage. But I think for the cancer patient, I don't think I think to kill the primary tumor is the number one concern, rather than concern about the secondary tumors from radiation exposure. And there are some studies about secondary tumors growing areas away from the primary, and then maybe develop due to the radiation tumors. The chance is actually not too high.
Okay. I have a question about neutrons. So how do you know what the dose of the neutrons are? You can't measure them as easily as charge particles.
Right, and with the neutrons, okay, I probably to defer to my colleague and try to do for the question. But I think the way that they do have a tissue equivalent proportional constant that can measure the energy loss in the vicinity. And so you measure the energy loss in the tissue equivalent environment, and that's the principle of those vicinity for neutrons.
Any other questions?
So how about microRNA? Because there's now the talk talking about when microRNA is damaged, so then the immune system attack doesn't be reduced. So do you study just the DNA break, double-strand break, or do you study the natural immune system protect against the astronauts, or do you all study, just the damage and also the appropriate result? So DNA breaking is not the only reason that cancer will develop, right?
I thought you are a physics major. Yeah, that's certainly interesting, because I enjoy talking about the biology too. And microRNA, especially, I mean, nowadays microRNA is a hot topic, and we looked at the microRNA as well, although we try to understand what microRNA, what the data means. And to the field, certainly, I mean, the DNA damage can go through different layers. And the initial damage that creates a double-strand break, which is fine if the double-strand break of the DNA is broken and it doesn't get repaired, and then it's all fine. But then it can get repaired, but then once it repairs, then the repair process normally will result in some alteration of the DNA sequence. And if this happens in some oncogene, then there's a mutation in the oncogene of P53, for instance, then you lose the function of the P53, then you lose the capability to stop the cells from growing uncontrollably. And so for that, we look at some of the gene expression changes in the DNA-related genes, DNA repair genes, for instance. So we look at gene expression, we look at the protein induction. microRNA is kind of a hot topic lately, and with radiation as well. And people have looked at the
RNA changes and after radiation exposure. Although how to interpret our microRNA data is we still have some issues with that, because the microRNA actually controls the gene. One microRNA can control the gene expression changes of many genes. Okay, and so the microRNA changes and the RNA changes somewhat have some relationships, which I think is a topic that the people are trying to understand. And so, and apoptosis, yes, apoptosis is one of the endpoints, and that's a particular type of a cell death. And if you were to look at the one of the pictures I showed earlier, that you have some cells that are traversed by particles and some are not. The ones that are traversed perhaps will go through apoptosis. But once the cell goes through apoptosis, it will release some signals to other neighboring cells, and those signals can cause mutations in those cells, and those we know. And then how that will, and actually in the last 10 years, that kind of changed the whole philosophy of radiation protection, because it's a low dose radiation is best, and whether you reduce the dose, and but still once you reduce the dose, you reduce the number of cells that get hit directly, especially for particles. But then whether that will reduce the damages in the neighboring cells, okay, when whatever molecules that are released from the dead cells, and that's still unknown. So that's certainly one of the research topics.
All right, let's thank the speaker again. Quick reminder, again, next week is going to be our last regular lecture. It's going to be the Shapley Lecture, sponsored by the American Astronomical Society. And it's going to be Dr. Edward Kolb from University of Chicago is going to be here, and he's going to be talking about mysteries of the dark universe. And the week after that, we're going to have the student presentations, where it's going to be the students who are graduating with a master's or bachelor's degree giving their presentations. And so those students, if you could email me like the title and abstract of your talk sometime between now and next Tuesday, I'd appreciate it. And then also about a week after that, on May 6th, that's when your final papers would be due. So any more drafts you want me to look at or anything like that, send them to me so I can look at those. And also after next Monday's lecture, we're going to do the final instructions for the students on how to give a talk and how so that you're prepared for anything that we need to do. So any questions? Okay. All right. So that